These are 3 different gimbal movements that I ensure will up your gimbal movement game. What's up guys, Anastas here from Subtle Cinematics, and today we're going to be breaking down 3 gimbal movements that I want to touch on. I feel that these gimbal movements are relatively common, but if you are a beginner gimbal user, then this is going to be a super knowledgeable video for you. So the first gimbal movement that we're going to go over is the semicircle motion. So the reason why this is the most common gimbal movement is because it's really difficult to replicate this semicircle smooth panning motion handheld without a gimbal. So this type of gimbal movement can be used on really any type of shoot. It can be used on a music video shoot, on a real estate video where you're maybe panning across a room really smoothly. It can be used on a event recap video. I use it all the time on event recap videos, fitness videos, really whatever you can think of. This movement can be used and will look very smooth. Another reason why I like the semicircle motion movement when using a gimbal is because you can either take it really slow where you're panning in a semicircle motion very slowly, or you can do it very fast paced where you can go from one side of your subject and loop all around to the other side of your subject, and then you can come back around and replicate that same shot but going the other way. I'm gonna lay over a shot right here that we have of Dyson pretending to take some photos here, and as you can see, I'm looping right around him very fast. So here I'm going both ways, and as you can see, when I'm shooting in 24 FPS at 50 shutter, getting a nice natural motion blur, everything around him is kind of like a parallax effect. So everything around him is moving very quickly, but because Dyson is nice and still, it makes it look like everything behind him is moving very quickly. And this just makes for a really awesome cinematic shot and is very easy to do if you do have a gimbal in your hands. Now, if we take this shot a little slower, as you can see, Dyson's taking photos again, but this time I'm just moving more slower. This is a more laid back shot. Your shot doesn't always have to be super dramatic. This can still look very cinematic. And we're gonna actually run these 2 shots back one more time because I'm gonna give you guys a little bonus tip here. If you guys angle your gimbal upwards, so take your gimbal, instead of holding it at eye level, bring it down to about chest level, and then kind of pan the gimbal up a little bit so it's kind of tilted upwards, maybe like 20 or 30 degrees. And now what we're going to do is, again, we're going to semicircle quickly around Dyson taking a photo. So as you can see, it just exposes like a different style of shot. It doesn't look as like corporate-y, I guess you could say, you know, just looking straight on, even though that shot does look good. But let's say you're shooting outdoors and you're shooting in a sunset or something, and you want to expose that sky, and you just, or maybe there's trees in the background, you want to expose everything in the environment that you wouldn't catch if you were just doing a straight on shot. You would just simply point your gimbal upwards and then just do that parallax semicircling motion around your subject. This makes for such an awesome gimbal shot, and I honestly always do that type of shot where I'm just kind of slightly just pointing up at my subject and making them look higher than life. And lastly, I want to touch on the lenses that you would maybe use for this type of a semicircling shot. I personally like using the Sigma 35mm f1.4. The 35mm focal length is just a perfect kind of common focal length that I like to use because it's easy to get those far away shots, and it's really easy to get those punched in shots. It's just really easy to kind of maneuver around with that 35mm focal length on a gimbal. And the last lens that I will recommend on a gimbal doing this 180 type degree shot or a side-to-side type motion would be a wide angle. So here we're using a 11 to 20mm f2.8. We're shooting all the way out at 11 mils, and this just kind of exposes the entire environment as a whole rather than a more tight angles. But this shot actually looks really good if you're kind of down low, pointing up at your subject a little further away and exposing the entire environment at a really wide angle focal length. Now I want to touch on frame rates that you would film in for the side-to-side or 180 degree panning shot using a gimbal. So here we have Dyson taking some photos. We're going to shoot this in 150 FPS. Now I'm going to cue Dyson when to put the camera up to his face. So I'm going to start on one side of him shooting at a high frame rate of 150 FPS, so super slow motion footage, and I'm going to come all the way around him, and when I get to that 3/4 mark, when I'm almost all the way to the other side of Dyson, I'm going to tell him to put the camera up to his face and pretend to take a photo. So I can basically speed ramp from my beginning point and then to like my 3/4 point, and then it shows Dyson bringing the camera up to his face. This looks super sweet. Using a high frame rate with the semicircle pattern with a gimbal just ensures that you can add a really dope looking speed ramp in there. Now shooting at 60 FPS when you're doing these types of movements is also really good, as you do have the option to use that clip as B-roll if you're shooting event recaps or really any type of cinematic video or any type of video in general. I do like to use this type of movement in 60 FPS, again, just so I have that option to use as B-roll. And I'll lay over a clip right here of me pointing the gimbal slightly upwards towards Dyson, and he's taking some photos there, and I'm just swooping around him in 60 FPS. As you can see, I can slow-mo the clip, then I can put it back into normal speed, and then I can slow-mo it again. This just ensures that you can obviously have the option to speed ramp there as well. Again, this is just an all-around great gimbal movement, and more of a beginner gimbal movement, but also something you will see experienced filmmakers do as well. The second gimbal movement that we're going to go over is the push-in, push-out movement. So this is a very simple movement that can be used on a gimbal. I personally recommend using a wide angle for something like this, just because it exposes your whole environment. And if you're using the gimbal and you run in really quick and then push out really fast, I would use that for a more dramatic type of a shot. It just looks really dope here. As you can see, I'm gonna lay over a shot of Dyson again taking photos, and I'm gonna push in really fast at 24 FPS and then push out really fast at 24 FPS, and it just looks really awesome. Now the push in, push out can also be done in a more slower paced movement, so you can push in a little slower. Again, we're using a wide angle for this shot in specific, so we're pushing in on Dyson really slowly. This is just a really good establishing shot to use as well, and is very, very simple to do. You can either do this at eye level. I personally like to do it at the chest level, kind of just subtly looking up at our subject and pushing in slowly, or you can go and get that ants eye view where where the gimbal's basically scraping the ground and you're pushing in while looking up at your subject. That also looks really dope too. And the last gimbal movement that I would recommend you guys trying out if you already haven't is the 360 shot. This looks super dope if you're, let's say, in like a crowded environment and your subject is sitting there, let's say snapping photos or maybe modeling, and you want to get that nice 360 degree view. You can just basically tell your subject to stay put where they are. So as you can see here, Dyson is standing still and he's pretending to take photos again, and I'm literally just circling around him a few times until I feel like I have the shot. Now this looks really good in really any frame rate that you can think of. So let's start at 24 FPS. So we're gonna sit at 50 shutter. So as you can see, the whole background gets blurred out, and the whole background actually looks like it's moving really fast, but since Dyson's staying still, all the focus is on him. And what I try to do is keep Dyson's head and body in the middle of the frame. You don't want Dyson's body or head to end up on the left side of the frame or the right side of the frame. You want him to be right in the middle when you're doing this type of a shot. It's just gonna look the most cinematic. You'll see people kind of being all over the place, and I'll lay something like that over here where you can see Dyson is in the left side of the frame or like the right side of the frame. It's kind of all over the place. It just doesn't look as good. Another type of shot too is if you are circling around your subject, what you can do is you can start at eye level, then you can slowly dip the gimbal down as you're 360ing around your subject, and you can bring the gimbal down and you can slowly point it up at the subject and then bring it back up to eye level. This looks super cinematic as well. It does take some time to get used to the gimbal movements and used to, panning the gimbal and the follow mode to your body movements. But the more you use your gimbal, the better you're gonna get at these types of movements. And lastly, I'm gonna talk about higher frame rates such as 60 FPS or 150 FPS or any sort of high frame rate like 120 or 180. So when you are doing this parallax or 360 degree effect, you can basically use this as a speed ramp. So what I'm actually gonna do for this shot is show you guys a really cool speed ramp of Matt and Dyson shooting at the same time. So we're gonna have Dyson here shooting some photos, pretending to shoot photos, and I'm going to be 360ing around him at 150 FPS. So we're going to be shooting this in slow motion. So I'm going to go around him twice. I'm going to circle around Dyson twice, and then I'm going to have Matt standing in the exact same location as Dyson, same spot, and he's going to be doing the exact same thing where he's going to be pretending to take photos. What I'm going to do is speed ramp the 360 And because it's speed ramping so quickly, you can transition a speed ramp of matte coming into frame. So it's going to transition from Dyson taking photos to matte taking photos. This is just a really easy technique for speed ramping, and just kind of showcases how cool your shots can look when you're doing this 360-degree movement when you're shooting in high frame rates. So that's pretty much it. Thanks everyone for watching. Let me know down below if you guys dig these types of gimbal movements, and let me know what type of gimbal movements you like to use on your sets. So with all that being said, guys, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Catch you guys on the next video. Peace.